Number 1, they're stubborn. People have been saying that Scorpio is stubborn since the Dark Ages. Okay, maybe there's a reason for that. Scorpio, maybe you deserve it a little bit. If you're rebutting or defending someone calling a Scorpio stubborn, it's never no, that's absolutely not true at all. It's always yes, but. Yeah, I'm stubborn, but not in the way that you think. People ignore the fact that there's nothing inherently bad about being stubborn. I mean, not inherently. It can be bad in a lot of situations, but not all situations. Until people gain more self-awareness and become more mature, they really love to perceive and judge the world based on their own ego and based on how it relates to their own specific experience, particularly if it was an upsetting or painful experience. People that roast Scorpios for being stubborn probably had some experience with a Scorpio where they were being extremely stubborn and it pissed them off. A Scorpio parent that would never apologize or acknowledge what they did wrong, even though it turned out they were clearly in the wrong. A Scorpio ex from a relationship that ended because of a big bad fight that the ex was like almost certainly in the wrong about, but they were too proud to admit it. They were too proud to come back. They were more okay with letting the relationship die than admitting they were wrong. But other people have experienced a Scorpio that is, stood behind a partner that's really struggling and trying their hard to get their big break in their career and just not quite getting there yet. Scorpios that supported people through illness or stood by them while they were in the throes of addiction. Maybe other family or friends said, it's not worth it, time to get real, give up on that goal. Scorpio said, I don't care what anyone thinks. I'm supporting you, I'm not going anywhere. So what kind of stubbornness are you gonna get from the Scorpios that you know? I mean, it depends on the person. I think that's the point. Better than describing them as stubborn, let's describe them based on what they are, right? Scorpio is a fixed sign. You have cardinal signs that are great at constantly driving forward movement, always pushing. The mutable signs, which are adaptable and respond well to change and new circumstances. The fixed signs excel in their ability to focus and commit to the things they commit to and to stay true and authentic, to be a storm shelter in the midst of a hurricane going on outside. The other fixed signs, Leo, Aquarius, Taurus, all are definitely guilty and could reasonably be called stubborn signs. But there's nothing bad about that. The signs in every modality, whether it's mutable, fixed, cardinal, there's unique superpowers to all three of those. And it's more just about how you wield it, what you choose to do with it. If I could shoot fireballs out of my hands, I could use that for good. I could fight crime. It seems like a lot of work, like a full-time job. I don't know if I could keep making TikTok videos, but that would be a good use of that power. I could also be a serial arsonist or cause forest fires. Smokey the Bear would not be happy about that. That would not be a good use of my fireball power. Scorpio is a fixed sign. That's what you're seeing. It's not stubbornness per se. Depends on the maturity level of the Scorpio as to what they do with that. Number 2, you can't trust them. You should first understand this about Scorpios and this concept of trust. Scorpios are actually usually pretty preoccupied, assuming you're someone of significance in their life, romantic partner, friend. If you're getting in close to them, if they're gonna be a part of your life, if you're gonna be part of their life, they wanna make sure that they can trust you. They may not be vocalizing this, they may not be observably, publicly documenting this thought process for them, or really it's an evaluation of you, but they are doing it. You're like, I can't trust Scorpio, and Scorpio's like, on the inside, I don't even know if I can trust you. Saying you flat out can't trust Scorpios, that's a false, that's a myth, right? That's an absolute, it's not accurate to say. But this concept of trust in the life and the journey of a Scorpio, it is, there's validity there. There is something to that. The concept of trust is a pain point for Scorpio. Scorpio will put, especially with partners, romantic partners, Scorpio will put you through a series of tests, some deliberate and conscious, some completely unconscious, in order for them to really be able to determine whether or not they can trust you. Even after years of building trust, Scorpio, I don't know if they ever totally extinguish that little pilot light in their head, that little voice that sometimes is completely silent and unnoticeable, but sometimes does rear its head. A fear that they will be betrayed, tricked, gaslit, lied to, made to look a fool. It's a core wound that Scorpios need to develop awareness of early on and learn how to nurture and address and soften to make sure that it doesn't cause issues for them. And I know a lot of Scorpios out there are saying, well, I have a lightning accurate intuition. I know when people are being dishonest. And yes, it's true, Scorpio does have a very strong intuition. They pick up on a lot of hidden dynamics. They can be human lie detectors. This is really a separate issue from that. It's not so much Scorpio having to come to terms with or ignore bad stuff that's happening that they're intuiting. This is more like the fear component of it. Sometimes Scorpios still have the fear that's separate from the intuition, and sometimes those get a little bit crisscrossed. That's where the problems come in. So I'm talking not about extinguishing that intuition at all, ever. It's really about dealing with that tiny voice of fear. When Scorpios have been with a committed partner for years, sometimes they can still say, oh, but what if? What if they are doing something? What if they did betray me? What if they did now after all these years and I would be caught off guard? These voices are not usually born out of legitimate intuition or legitimate rational stuff. Sometimes it's born out of a recognition that like, wow, after all this time and all these years of building trust with this person and of being vulnerable with this person, an act of betrayal would be infinitely more painful, infinitely more debilitating and traumatic at this stage. And so like, what if, right? This is subtle. It's not like Scorpios are constantly going around never able to trust a life partner they've been with for 10 or 15 years. It's more just sometimes a preoccupation or obsession or an inability to look away from the darkest, most apocalyptic, worst case scenario. And Scorpios are typically very good at controlling those thoughts as they get older. My only point is that this is a core hard spot for Scorpios, right? It's always a little bit there. And even if it's never an issue, like maybe a Scorpio has been up a lot of nights. Maybe they've been working hard at work and they haven't been getting a lot of sleep, or they're feeling under the weather and their normal sort of self-regulating, emotional regulating mechanisms are weakened. Maybe that voice pops up. Anyway, I'm digressing. Even before having committed to someone, even before and especially before having built trust with someone, along that windy path of actually creating that trust in the first place, of getting to know someone, Scorpio is laying out tests. They're comparing all their notes that they're gathering, not necessarily writing down, but they're natural detectives. There's a reason why they make great human lie detectors, if you will. I think it's an apt statement. Someone might send them a photo over iMessage and it's like, hey, sending a hello from the pumpkin patch, and it's like a picture of them at the pumpkin patch. And then a Scorpio will like download the photo into their photos and look at the metadata, and they'll see like when the photo was originally taken and see that the photo is like from yesterday or a few hours ago and doesn't quite make sense in the context of the text that was sent at the time that it was sent. I know, it's a little unhinged. And sometimes this is like a totally harmless thing, you know, maybe it's a harmless thing, but Scorpio sometimes just wants to confirm. So they might ask a question. They're not gonna say all that. They may not admit that they've done that. They're not gonna admit that they looked at a freaking metadata of a friendly photo of you at a pumpkin patch, but they make sure that the X's and O's check out. So they might ask you a question. Oh, like was this from today? The point is that like even white lies spell trouble. Like consistency and follow through are so important for a Scorpio. White lies, cracks in the foundation indicate much larger fissures below, you know, fissures in the trust. Sometimes Scorpios test in more unconscious ways. They get excessively emotional about what seems like a super minor issue. Often this is because Scorpios feel so viscerally and they're so sensitive and they're constantly having to carry around this complex universe of viscerally felt emotions that don't have room or form to exist or be expressed on the everyday world, on the everyday sphere. You can't express all of that, right? It's too disruptive to themselves, to relationships. It's like you can't follow every current. You can't grab every gust of wind. It's also incredibly hard for Scorpios to be comfortable expressing those emotions with someone that even wants to hear it, right? It's so vulnerable. It makes Scorpio feel exposed and potentially primed for attack, again, or betrayal. And so when they do sometimes explode or overreact to these small things, those small things are often proxies. They're small indicators of much larger feelings that are moving underneath. Sometimes those things just come out. And sometimes there's no real reason for them, right? Other than just what I described. Sometimes though, they unconsciously come out because it's an unconscious testing mechanism just to see what the other person's reaction is going to be. Do they demonize, criticize? Do they shame you? Do they immediately start putting up walls or pulling back? Or do they try and empathize, right? You need to set boundaries with Scorpio when they have intense emotions, but you also need to understand that Scorpio is going to need someone to put up boundaries while also being compassionate, while trying to understand, while trying to validate. Not necessarily condone, not necessarily promote as a source of truth, but to again, understand and validate the emotional experience of Scorpio, to understand how Scorpio is feeling, and to understand that even when sometimes Scorpio knows, oh, this stuff is irrational or it's so intense, like I'm still carrying the weight of the pain of having to constantly be reminding myself of all of that and work it out. All this is to say that Scorpio can project their difficulty in trusting people outward. They can reflect it back. Their own insecurity about whether they can trust, their own fear to do that is mirrored. And so you, on the other side, are also seeing someone that you find difficult to read or difficult to trust, or someone that seems like a flight risk. I'm also not saying, oh, the fact that you can't trust a Scorpio, that's entirely your fault because you're not trustworthy and you need to make sure that Scorpio can trust you. I'm just saying that this issue of trust isn't always one-dimensional. There's a lot of hidden components to it, and the trust level that you have or experience with a particular Scorpio, to the extent that they are trustworthy, they have integrity, they're honest and upfront with you, really has so much to do with where they are in their own personal process and maturing process. A Scorpio that has worked through their own insecurities and trust issues and fears can be one of the best, most sympathetic, most secure confidants that you will ever have in your life. You can literally tell them, if you want to, share this stuff like your deepest traumas, your family traumas, your fears, your deepest insecurities. And a truly evolved Scorpio will hear it and acknowledge it and validate it, and they will protect it. The freaking scary part of that is that an unevolved Scorpio may not be trustworthy and may ultimately use those things against you when they feel very hurt or threatened, which sucks, right? All signs can be toxic. All of them can. It's just that the extremes and the range between the toxic Scorpio and the evolved Scorpio is pretty large, and the outcomes with toxic Scorpios can be really hard and painful, while the outcomes with very evolved Scorpios can be transformational, spiritual, like full of incredible light and love. So it's a little tough. For those really struggling on the lower rings, the thought of being vulnerable, of being betrayed, the fear of being lied to is so intense for them. It's so vulnerable that they just can't bear the idea of exposing themselves or being more trusting of you than they perceive in the other direction. They keep this distance and behave in more secret ways. And that can be extremely frustrating. Until a Scorpio matures, it's very frustrating. You have to communicate, you have to set boundaries, you have to use your intuition, and you have to decide what you will and won't tolerate, and give it a scout's try and see what kind of Scorpio you're working with. Number 3, they look scary and intimidating. Scorpios have an incredibly intimidating disposition, vibe, aura, look, whatever you want to say. They typically have a pretty piercing gaze. They dress in a typically distinct or bold way. Not a particular style. It's not like they all dress in black, but there's a sharpness to it. There's an intensity. They wear it somewhere. It may not be in their clothes or their style, but typically you'll see it in some way. And it demands acknowledgement, right? Scorpios can be intimidating, and I don't know if there's a lot else to say about that. It's like when you're starving, you drive to the only Five Guys burger place that you know in the Tri-County area. You go get your delicious burger, you decide you're gonna bring it back home, you make the drive back, you get out of your car, and then you trip on a pine cone, and your bag and soda and burger goes flying, and all comes out of the bag, falls on the ground, all of it spills out, it's all ruined. Like Scorpios being intimidating, you need to acknowledge what's there, what just happened, but what can you do about it now? You can't change the tragedy that has just occurred. I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that Scorpios are often way less intimidating than they actually look on the outside. Unless you're dealing with a Scorpio moon, in which case they're way more intimidating on the inside, even if they look kind of innocent on the outside. For the right people, those walls, that intimidating facade, it comes down, so to speak. It doesn't actually come down, nothing changes. They still look the way they look. All right, this ray of sunshine is creeping through, so I'm gonna try and wrap up this video. Hopefully sooner rather than later. Okay, as I was saying, the walls don't come down. It's just you see that intimidating demeanor more in the context of someone you now really know on a different level, someone that's tremendously sensitive and emotional and empathetic and complex. Don't let their intimidating demeanor stop you from approaching them or trying to get to know them, seeing what they're up to, seeing what they're all about. Scorpios want to connect with other people. They want to forge bonds. They don't want to settle for surface level, lonely, small talk. They don't want to be an island. They crave that deep connection. And they're looking for people that meet that criteria, that can meet them on their level. If there's potential for a connection, the Scorpio will sense it, you'll sense it, and they won't shut you out. And if you find that there's not a connection, well, who the heck cares if they're intimidating or not, right? They're not meant for you, who cares? You're going on and moving about your life. Maybe where this issue might actually bother some people is, say you're dating a Scorpio and maybe you're worried about how other people perceive Scorpio, right? Other people are picking up on that intimidating facade, that intimidating nature. I will tell you right now though, while yes, this is something that you're perfectly entitled to care about, it's not really healthy, not for the relationship, not really for anything. And it's also 100% not going to be received well by the Scorpio to the extent that this is an issue that you ever bring up. Everyone needs to bring their most authentic self to the table. Intensity is part of that equation. It's part of that essence. A lot of Scorpios are already so self-aware too of the fact that they're intimidating or that they're hyper intense or that they're extremely sensitive in a way that scares people. A lot have often been told or shamed into feeling like they're too much or they're too intense or they're too this or they're too that. And when met with those comments or those criticisms, it only becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think that the intimidation, the defensiveness, the unapproachability comes out more. Really, you make a Scorpio feel safe and secure and make them feel like there's consistency and you're there and you don't care what the noise is. You're there for them in whatever way they are. That's what really brings the light and the warmth and the charm out of a Scorpio. And you give it that security, that trust, that enduring support. In the meantime, you can't worry about the opinions or the impressions of other people. It's not relevant and there's no room for it in a relationship with a Scorpio. This is not an exhaustive list. It's also not even the top 3 reasons that people hate Scorpios. It's just 3 reasons. There'll be a part 2 of this video in the not too distant future.